Very nice to meet you, and thank you very much for having me participate in this workshop. So I am indeed currently working at Sarah International in California, and I finished my PhD a few months ago at the Universidad de Valencia. And let me tell you a little bit more about what I worked on during my PhD on life habits, circadian rhythms, and metabolic health during childhood. So let's start with metabolism. Maybe. Yes. So the metabolism is the ensemble of the reactions that are taking place in a living being and providing the energy necessary to live. So it's a balance between the energy intake, so the intake, but not only what's eaten, but what is absorbed, and what is used by our body. So our basal metabolism, the digestion, which consumes a lot, the thermic regulation in childhood growth, which is an important characteristic, and emotional and mental and physical activity. Together, they form a balance, and this balance is influenced by the biology of the individual, its psychology, and also its environment. And in the end, this balance is compensated by the storage capacity that we have in our body, which is mainly our adipose tissue, which is not only a storage organ, but also an endocrine, so capable of producing hormones, and which can feed back to, for example, the leptin hormone produced by the adipose tissue can inhibit the nutritional intake by producing a satiety feeling. So yeah, it's a dynamic regulation altogether. And in my PhD, I've been particularly interested in the temporal dimension of the metabolism. Why is that? So us living beings and human are living in an environment which is cyclic, with day and night, so light and darkness cycles associated with temperature changes over 24 hours. And in this temporal environment, we have organized our activities. As a daily species, we have organized our sleep during the dark period and our nutritional intake, physical and mental activities during the day, during the light period. And so consequently to this, we also have circadian rhythms, periods of 24 hours in our metabolic and mental activities. But these temporal, like 24 hours repartition of our activities, are they only a passive response to this cyclic environment and cyclic activities? No, because we have clocks. And I'm going to talk here now about our rhythmic system, which is close to one day, close to a day, cerca día, circa diem in Latin. So the circadian rhythms. What are the mechanisms under the circadian rhythms? There are two main mechanisms. One is the clock genes, and the second one is the activity of melatonin. Let's start with a very simplified version of what are the clock genes. They are a group of genes which form a loop of regulation when the genes are, so from these genes are produced proteins, which bind together and come and inhibit the expression of their own genes. And after the cell makes its cleaning activity, then the inhibitory complex is no longer present, the inhibition is lifted, and these proteins are produced again. And this loop has a period of 24 hours. There are actually several loops to make really sure that it's very robust, but that's the idea. So they behave a little bit like pacemakers located all over the body. And interestingly, they don't only act as pacemakers, but they also control the expression of other genes from the metabolism. And they are located all over our organism. In all the cells in which we have investigated, we have found circadian rhythms, even in vitro. But now you may wonder, okay, so we have pacemakers in all our tissues, but how are they synchronized together? And most importantly, how are they synchronized to our environment? Because we know that when we travel, we can feel some jet lag, but after some days, we are finally synchronized again with the light-dark periods from our new location. And this is the activity of melatonin. So our eyes perceive lights from our environment and transmits the signal to our central clock, and himself relays the signal to the pineal gland. And this light pulse inhibits melatonin production. In the contrary, when no light is perceived anymore by our eyes or lower levels of light, then the melatonin inhibition is lifted. Melatonin is produced and flows in the blood and the body fluids to all the organs. And this is also synchronizing, and these two mechanisms are making sure that they are robust circadian rhythms in all our tissues. Let's look a little bit more in details, for example, at the adipose tissue. Some researchers from Murcia have investigated the expression of genes, of clock genes and of metabolic genes in adipocytes, so in fat cells. And they have observed that there are circadian rhythms in the expression of these key metabolic genes, which participate to regulate satiety and energy storage in the fat cells. But it's not all, not only the adipose tissue, but also all the digestive system presents circadian rhythms, with rhythms in the saliva production, the diversity in the microbiota, the answering microbiome defenses, etc. So we can really understand that if these organs have circadian rhythms in all these processes, that means that there are moments of the day in which the body is very much prepared to receive a nutritional intake, and some moments of the day in which it's really not the best time for him to receive nutrition. That's why, in terms of nutrition, timing matters. But this timing, is it the same for everybody? Well, the short version is human beings are diurnal animals, but it's interesting to look a little bit more in detail at the chronotypes. We all know around us some people who have a lot of energy in the morning and are very tired very early in the evening, and people who are the opposite, very hard to wake them up, and then in the evening they have a lot of energy. Maybe this person is your little brother or your son or daughter, or in general, yeah, some profiles are characteristic, and we will see why. What is influencing the chronotype? So there are several elements. One element is the genetic. There are families of very early persons and very late persons, but it's also something that evolves during the lifespan and tends to differ between women and men, between male and female. And we can see that during adolescence is the moment in which the chronotype is the latest. So that's an important element, and it's even later in males in average. But that's not all. Another element is the strength of the time cues. So the strength of the elements that our body uses as time cues. So the light, the mental activity, The physical activity, the temperature, the sleep, and the nutrition are all elements that our body can use to know what time it is outside. And this can, like in some situation in which the timing of the life habits are completely opposed or completely observed compared to the environmental cues, results in a state that is called chronodisruption, which is actually what I am experimenting right now because I just did a night shift for my sleep lab, the joys of studying sleep. And the consequences of chronodisruption are known as weight gain, increased risk of diabetes, cardiovascular disease, cancer, and higher risk of mental disorders, including depression. But without going to this extent, what do we know about the relationship between life habits timing and health? Well, we know that short sleep duration increases the energy expenditure because the body spends more time in a more active state, whereas sleep is more a resting state and spends less energy. But to compensate, there is an increase in the feeling of hunger. And when there is more hunger, there is almost always a supplementary food intake, which is likely to be unhealthy food because at 11 p.m. or midnight, few people start cooking spinach. And in addition to that, it arrives exactly out of a phase with the metabolism, as we discussed earlier. And finally, it's this short sleep duration usually induces more fatigue in the following day and results in a lower physical activity. Another element which is interesting to know, and in particular during adolescence, is the concept of social jet lag, which consists of having very different, varying schedule, repeatedly varying schedule during the week and the weekend, late, early, late, early. And this social jet lag is associated with obesity, inflammation, and mental health disorders, and is more frequent in later chronotype, which take advantage of the weekend to go to live more in phase with their own inner clock. Let's talk now about screens in the bedroom. They are associated, they induce a later melatonin onset, later sleep onset, more sleep disturbances. And finally, weak time cues. So lower light during the day, less bright light exposure, and higher light during the night. So less of a contrast between the day and the night. So it's a weak time cue. But also irregular meal timings, which change from one day to another. Then the body cannot rely so much more on these elements, so it doesn't respond as strongly. And the napping habit also, so taking a nap during the day is associated with a lower amplitude in the circadian rhythms studied in the organism. And let's talk now about eating times. Is it better to eat early or late? Is it better to eat high quantities early or high quantities late? Well, the early eating behaviors and the restricted time, window of eating has results in higher metabolic and immune markers. An interesting thing, so Marta Garaulet, a researcher from Murcia, does a lot of these researches and showed that so according to your genome, your genes, you are more or less sensitive to this, and switching to an earlier meal timing can be more or less effective on weight reduction and metabolic health characteristics. But some people are very sensitive to that, and so when these person eat late or have a lot of social jet lag, they have particularly poor metabolic health. And what about late physical activity? Not a lot of work has been done on the effect of late physical activity on the circadian rhythms, but it tends to show that physical activity during the 2 hours before bedtime delays the body temperature rhythm, which is another way than melatonin to measure the circadian rhythm. Oh, this is not on purpose, sorry. So as a summary, knowing that adolescents have a layered chronotype, that light exposure, including mobile phones, meals, and physical activities have an impact on the circadian rhythms. Knowing that life habits and social jet lag can worsen metabolic health. How can we promote physical and mental health in childhood and adolescence? Several leads are probably screen use campaigns or light exposures during promoting light exposure during the day, and also working on school schedule, which, so I couldn't attend, unfortunately, the previous talks, but I'm pretty sure you have talked about this super interesting and important subject already. So thank you, and continue doing this advocacy work. It's extremely important. I want to thank you and to thank everyone who made this work possible, and my sister for the little drawings, and you for listening to this presentation.